In August and September of 1991, Wall Street faced a crisis that had nothing to do with falling prices or market volatility. It was a crisis of trust. Salomon Brothers, one of the most powerful firms in the U.S. government bond market, admitted that bids had been placed in Treasury auctions using customer names without authorization. In practical terms, this allowed the firm to acquire more bonds than regulations permitted, bypassing the strict 35% limit imposed on any single bidder in a Treasury auction. That limit existed for a clear reason. Treasury auctions are designed to prevent excessive concentration of newly issued government debt. If one institution controls too much of an issuance, it can distort the secondary market, restrict supply, and influence prices in ways that undermine fairness and transparency. The violation was not merely procedural, it challenged the credibility of the system that finances the U.S. government itself. The government's response was swift and unusually severe. The U.S. Treasury temporarily barred Salomon Brothers from participating in auctions of Treasury notes and bonds. For a primary dealer, this was not a symbolic punishment or a public relations setback. It was an existential threat. Primary dealers rely on access to Treasury auctions to function. Without that access, their role in the financial system and their survival is fundamentally compromised. Although the suspension was later partially eased, the damage was already done. The episode triggered investigations, resignations, internal turmoil, and intense public scrutiny. At the center of the debate was a simple question. Could the Treasury market continue to function if its largest participants were willing to bend the rules designed to protect it? That is the moment when Warren Buffett entered the picture, and when the idea of the most powerful man who never speaks begins to make sense. Buffett was not brought in to manage headlines or calm investors with reassuring sound bites. He was brought in to impose a standard. He assumed the role of interim chairman of Salomon Brothers, stepping into a company facing regulatory pressure, political oversight, and a rapidly collapsing reputation. The symbolism was striking. A rule created to restrain powerful institutions had been violated, and now another kind of power was being introduced. Not through force or publicity, but through credibility. Buffett's task was simple in description and brutal in execution: restore trust or let the firm fail. When Buffett appeared before Congress, it was not a performance. It was not a negotiation. It was a public test of accountability. His message was deliberately plain. He urged every employee to act as their own compliance officer and to apply a single, uncompromising filter before making decisions. Imagine that action being described on the front page of a newspaper the next morning, written by a knowledgeable and skeptical reporter, and read by your family. If the action could not withstand that exposure, it should not be taken. Then came the statement that would define the episode and echo through business history. Buffett explained that financial losses are tolerable. Reputational losses are not. If the firm lost money, he said, he would be understanding. If it lost even a fragment of its reputation, he would be ruthless. This was not rhetoric. It was a declaration of policy, delivered under oath, at a moment when credibility was the only remaining asset. This is the first act of the story. Buffett does speak, but only when it matters. He does not compete for attention, dominance, or narrative control. He appears when the structure of the system itself is under threat, and instead of charisma or spectacle, he establishes a line that can be enforced. Rules first, transparency always, consequences without exception. What followed confirmed that this was not a symbolic stance. The Salomon Brothers scandal resulted in sweeping investigations, structural changes, and one of the largest civil settlements ever tied to violations in the government securities market at the time. The entire episode revolved around a single concept: reputation. That is why 1991 matters. It was the moment when Buffett demonstrated that silence, paired with an uncompromising standard, can exert more influence than noise ever could. In a market built almost entirely on trust, the absence of theatrics became authority. And when the boundary was drawn publicly, the message was unmistakable. Power does not need to shout when it controls the line that no one dares to cross.